Well, good evening, everyone. I came in a little late, so apparently Jishin and Gary are away this week.
Yes.
Okay. So I didn't know if I was going to get introduced, so I guess I'll just start. All right. So this section here is entitled Train Yourself Thus, the Buddha's Instructions to Bahia. And I wanted to, before I read the instructions, I wanted to go back to the first paramita briefly, generosity, in the section on the perfection of giving. Reb says some stuff here relevant to generosity and also to these instructions that the Buddha read to Bahia. He says here, the perfection of giving is wisdom that realizes the interdependence, inseparability, and insubstantiality of giver, receiver, and gift. All three are present in each moment of generosity, whether we see this or not. This means the perfection of generosity is one of the forms of the perfection of wisdom. How is my audio? Can you all hear me pretty well? Okay. So, let me read the first paragraph of these instructions. The Buddha said thus, here in Bahia, you should train yourself thus. In the seen will be merely what is seen. In the heard, there will be merely what is heard. Or in the hearing, you could substitute hearing for heard. In the hearing or in the seeing, there will be only what is seen. In the hearing, there will be only what is heard. In the sensed, or in the sensing of our experience of sensing, will be merely what is sensed. In the cognized will be merely what is cognized. And I like to substitute thinking for cognized because I think it gives us a more intimate experience, because this is an exercise in which we're given the opportunity to deeply explore our actual experience of seeing, hearing, thinking, and feeling. So in the thinking or in thought, there will be merely what is thought. In this way, you should train yourself thus, Bahia. Then he goes on, when Bahia, for you in the seen is merely what is seen, in the cognized what is merely what is cognized, then Bahia, you will not be with that. When Bahia, you are not with that, then Bahia, you will not be in that. When Bahia, you are not in that, then Bahia, you will be neither here nor beyond, nor in between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. So I'm sitting here right now wondering, how am I going to explain this to you? Just this is the end of suffering. If only it was that simple, right? We'd all be free of suffering. Because in a way, all there is to our experience is the knowing of it, in the sense of what he's talking about here, in the sense of being aware of it, in the sense of experiencing it, in the sense of witnessing it. That's all there really is to our experience. But, part of the reason we sit Zazen is to really realize this in our own intimate experience with ourselves and in being with others too. So, when I read the first part about generosity and how he says that the perfection of generosity realizes the interdependence, inseparability, and insubstantiality of the giver, receiver, and gift, we can say the same thing about these instructions in terms of seeing, hearing, sensing, and thinking. So the perfection of concentration in this context realizes the wisdom of the inseparability, interdependence, and insubstantiality of the seer, the seen, and the seeing itself. You know, all three are present, just like Reb said. All three of those receiver, giver, and giving are present, whether we realize it or not. The same is true of our seeing, hearing, sensing, and thinking. Is that clear? Does that make sense? How it's related? Okay. If it's not, we'll have time for discussion, and I can maybe say a little more about that. But I think you see the similarity. You know, when we say in the seeing there will be just the seen, well, it doesn't literally mean that, because if we don't have the ability to see, there's no seeing. You know, if there's no seeing, there's no seen. If there's no seer, there's no seen, and there's no seeing, right? Okay, so again, this is part of what you know, when he says in the experiencing, there's just the experience. It means that in our experience, the way these instructions are meant to be carried out is that we don't try to grasp or turn away from any ideas we have about our seeing, our hearing, or thinking, or sensing. In other words, we're just present to it, and we're not grasping onto any thoughts about it. We're not reacting to it in any way. We're not grasping, we're not turning away. We're just there, present. But we're still fully alive. We're not trying to remove anything. So our feelings are there, our thinking is there, our seeing is present, and our hearing is present. So another way to say this is that in our experience, let's just use seeing as an example, in the seer, in the seen, and the seeing itself, they're all just one substance in Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy. They're all of the same substance of our consciousness. Now, in our culture, we're not used to thinking this way. You know, we're deeply conditioned to think that we're a separate entity inside this body somehow, usually maybe in our head. And the world outside there is made of matter, and there's a definite separation there. We're separate from the world out there. So Buddha's insight was that there really is no separation. Thought doesn't create separation, doesn't separate anything. It doesn't really define anything or confine anything or limit anything. It just expresses itself, and it's a very useful tool of communication. So when we begin to sense that this line of separation between my body and the outside world is only made of thought, it's only there because the idea of separation is there, fear starts to dissipate, and we're free to interact with the world without being afraid of something outside. And when we're free of all ideas about inside or outside, this is what the Buddha means by we're not with things because they're not separate with us. When we say we're with things, of course, in the practical sense, we're with them. but we're not with them as separate from them. We're not in between, we're not outside, we're not inside, we're not located anywhere, just like space is not located anywhere, it's boundless. And the main insight, for me anyway, that Buddha had is that essentially we all are that openness, that vast openness within which all manifestation arises. If we look deeply for the separation, can we really find it? Other than the ideas that we think we're separate, can we really find the actual separation? No matter where we are, the sky is just as vast and boundless. No matter where we go, how far we travel into outer space, how far back or forward in time we try to go, it's always just here now. So, last week we were talking about concentration on the welfare of the world, and then this week it's Reb mentions at the end of the last chapter that now we're going to study how concentration leads to insight and wisdom. So here on page 94, I'll read in a paragraph here. So the instructions that Bahia received sound simple, but they are hard to practice fully. Like saying the Grand Canyon is a hole in the ground. They are pretty hard to practice fully. As an example, there's in a previous chapter, Reb was talking about patience. And I think I presented that particular section also. And it was about this guy who was this Buddhist deity or former Buddhist teacher who was pretty good at patience because this angry king didn't like his answers and started slicing him up with a sword. And Reb said, I sometimes wonder if I would still be able to be patient if someone was slicing me up with a sword. And I was like, Reb, you have to wonder about whether you'd be patient. I remember saying when I was talking about it, I'm pretty sure patience wouldn't be, maybe after a year or something, or a day or a month, or, after a while you kind of lose contact with your body, I would think, and maybe you'd be all right, I don't know. But anyway, so they're hard to practice fully because it's the end of suffering if we can practice them very fully. And whatever, like we talk about unconditionally welcoming whatever comes. This has been repeated again and again throughout the book. So what happens to our suffering without the idea I don't like it? If I'm okay with it, accepting suffering isn't really suffering. Suffering is, there's that old story, pain is an experience, suffering is a story. And it's become kind of a cliche. But if you can accept pain, it's not suffering. Suffering is the rejection of pain. Or it's more specifically, suffering is the rejection of whatever you reject. It's the refusal to accept. And getting stuck in ideas of, I don't like this. So, Reb says, instructions are hard to practice fully. The teaching is to meet all phenomena wholeheartedly without adding or subtracting anything, which is really kind of the same as not grasping or turning away. In doing so, we are allowing them to be fully themselves, just as they are. When we do this, we realize that we are not in them or with them. At the same time, we see that we are included in them and they in us. Allowing the seen to be just the seen, we intimately meet our lives and the world with all its joys and sorrows face to face. There can be states of concentration without wisdom, but there can be no wisdom without concentration. This deep concentration, which the Buddha taught to Baya, arises simultaneously with wisdom. So the way I understand this is that when we realize that, like I was saying earlier, that thought doesn't have the power to control us, doesn't separate anything, confine anything, define anything, really. We can't find any real separate entities. We can find ideas about things, but we can't describe or perceive the essence of things. And that's why teachers they can talk about emptiness being, or Zen being, the aliveness we bring to each moment, but it's not perceivable or describable. So when we're free of all perceivables and describables, the ideas of inside or outside don't apply. And so being within and but not within, being without but not without, being not with or not in, all those things are irrelevant. We can be all at once because everything is totally of one substance and is always flowing fluidly together and apart. But it's all one substance, like the current in the ocean is made of ocean water, So the ocean is in the current is in the ocean. And if we don't get that we can't get it, conceptually, then we try to keep figuring it out, and then it feels like it's all abstract and it doesn't mean anything, or we feel like we're not getting it. But getting it is accepting that you don't get it with your mind. It's just relaxing and realizing that, we don't know. It's called the don't know mind in Zen is really just accepting that you don't know. We don't know what we are, but we know that we are. There was in another group where we were reading some instructions by Roshi Joan Halifax on how to deal with pain. And so I'll just read these real quickly. And they very much express the spirit of the paramitas here. She says, you can repeat these affirmations. May I find the inner resources to be open to my pain. May I turn toward my pain with kindness. May I observe my pain with equanimity. May I realize that this pain is not permanent. May I let go of my expectations around my pain. May I know that I am not my pain, and not my body, not my illness. May I accept my pain knowing that my heart is not limited by it. So that's another way of saying our hearts are not limited by it. The freedom to fully feel pain and not reject it. Know that we are not the pain itself, not our body or our illness. That's another hard one. But just think in terms of the current in the ocean. Einstein taught us, and quantum physics and most scientists are now realizing that matter is energy. So the body is made of consciousness. So it's the same thing. We're in the body and not in the body. The body doesn't limit the awareness in which it arises in, just like the current doesn't limit the ocean in which it arises in or which it moves in. So our body is made of consciousness. It's made of energy, like awareness. It's the same. It's one of one substance. It's inseparable, interdependent. and insubstantial of independent existence. When he says insubstantiality of all experience, it means it doesn't exist by itself. It doesn't have any own being. It's just part of the one, the aliveness that we are. So I've been going kind of long, so let's open up for discussions. You can just unmute or just speak up. It's okay not to know.
Jiten, thank you for your talk. When I read that chapter, I was kind of wondering why Reb Anderson picked that particular paragraph. I thought it was very confusing until I realized that, to me, that whole little lesson just meant, don't tell yourself stories. Just observe what is and don't embellish it. So I wonder if I was off the mark or on the mark.
Sounds like you're very much on the mark. Yes. Sometimes we have to tell stories in order to realize the futility of getting attached to any stories. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's also helpful to remember that Buddhist stories are also just stories.
Yes.
Whether things are substantial or insubstantial or dependent or independent or one or many, those are all just stories. If I'm sitting here pondering that everything is all one, the substance, all right, I'm philosophizing. That's a huge story that is keeping me from just sitting on this cushion and feeling my butt on the cushion and feeling my hands and hearing what's going on and seeing what's going on and just dropping all of that story and I think that's the beauty of that paragraph is really what the Buddha is just saying is just see. Right? If you're looking at something, just see. Just hear birds or whatever is going on. Just, all right, feel. What are your ankles doing right now? What is your butt doing right now? Like just to be right here with the energy of our life and our being settled in our being and just experiencing. And I don't know, I'm not sure I agree with Reb that that's harder. Maybe it's hard because we make it hard. And because we think too much, we just overthink. And I don't know, that's just interesting. Maybe it's tough because we just always want to put some type of a story between ourselves and our experience. And I think that the Buddha and our Zen practice is challenging us and encouraging us and supporting us to just let all that go. It's exhausting, even just trying to make sense of it. We don't have to make sense of it because we can just be here with ourselves as we are, with life as it is, minus the story. We experience a sense of rest when we're willing to do that and able to do that. The sensation of suffering.
Yeah, thank you, Roshan. That was very, very appropriate. It also reminded me of something else Reb said in an earlier chapter that would have been good for this talk. He says the bodhisattvas are always thinking. How can we save beings from suffering? Bodhisattvas are always thinking like that. And he says that he himself is always doing that. And he says, but they don't grasp the thoughts. They calmly offer them as gifts. And so they offer them as gifts to help all beings. They offer them as gifts to Buddha. And so that they're thinking, because they're not grasping the thoughts, they're not thinking about stories. They're just offering their life energy, like just seeing and just thinking. There's just thinking, just as there's just seeing, there is just thinking. If you're not grasping thinking, it's fine. It's good. It's helpful. If you're not grasping it and getting wound up in it, with likes and dislikes. And so they offer them calmly, and that the thinking doesn't disturb their deep tranquility. So that's the other thing. And it's true that philosophizing doesn't help, but exploring with our spirit of inquiry and bringing our aliveness to that spirit of inquiry. So the spirit is there, the thinking about how to save beings from suffering, that spirit is helpful, but thinking itself and trying to find answers through our thinking. If we do that too much, it doesn't help. So thank you, Roshan.
We are almost out of time. Is there anyone else who would like to comment, either in the cloud zendo or the dirt zendo?
Thank you for your talk. It reminded me of a comment I heard from someone else about pain is inevitable and suffering. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And I guess the way you explained that, the way you said it was suffering is a story, which is I think is a reminder that we take for granted. We assume that there's nothing we can do about it, but we have all the tools to be able to understand that we're bringing, by rejecting our lives or whatever it is that we're dealing with, that is what brings suffering. Thank you.
Thanks, Georgina.
So for most of your talk, I was completely confused. And what came very strongly was, well, I dislike lots of things. And then, it's, well, those are all just stories. Those are all just stories. So can we separate the story? And that's what I'm left with.
The key is to bring patience, generosity, and, compassion to the compulsion to get stuck in our stories.
Thank you, Shika. So we are at the end of our time together. So let's recite the 4 vows.
Creations are numberless. I vow to them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are limitless. I vow to feel them. Creations are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to